What's your first thought when you feel like you've hit a plateau? Chances are that you start to ask yourself what else you need to learn. You must be missing some key piece of information, and if you could only figure out what that is, you would continue your upward trajectory. It's natural to feel this way. We're serial pattern recognizers, and uncertainty fills us with dread. Whenever we run into problems, our first instinct is to blame it on some gap in our knowledge and then dive headfirst into learning in order to address that gap. But what if that constant search for new information is often just a way to evade reality? To even understand the question, you need to know some simple facts about how our brains absorb and sort information. First of all, as much as we make a big deal about it, learning is the easy part. Consider how your habits, both good and bad, tend to build up unconsciously. You learn the most efficient route for driving to your favorite restaurant, for example, without much conscious intent, or how you automatically infer what kind of person someone is based on subtle cues they give off when they speak or take certain types of action. Your brain is always on the hunt for new information that leads to some kind of consequence. You don't need to think about how to learn much of what you've learned in life already. It happens in the background without any real effort on your part. It's not a stretch to say that you're a learning machine. It's a big part of what makes you human. The challenge is therefore not about how to get information into your mind, but what to do with it once it's there. To be more specific, the big problem is that some information sticks around and influences your behavior in a significant way, even when you don't want it to. This is the problem of unlearning, which has and will continue to have far more of an impact on your life than learning. Your existing attitudes, habits, and knowledge are where the goldmine of improvement exists, but we have such a hard time with unlearning that we often ignore it in favor of something that just feels less threatening. Consider the process of learning a language. For a child, it's simple. They imitate what they hear from other people, and over time, their brains naturally associate sounds and written words with meaning. They can enhance their understanding of the language by taking lessons, reading books, and so on, but the baseline process is straightforward for them. An adult who wants to pick up a second language, on the other hand, has a serious problem to contend with: the fact that they've been speaking another language for decades. Their pronunciations and grammatical habits have been built up to the point of fluency, and that allows them to communicate in fast, efficient ways with other people who speak that language. But if they want to learn a new language, they must, in some sense, break down what they understand about language in general and then rebuild it to accommodate the new language. Adults therefore require a large amount of unlearning in order to speak this new language. If they cling too tightly to their native tongue, then it will handicap their ability to speak a new one. It's such a difficult, intense ordeal that adult students often abandon the project and pursue something easier. Children, on the other hand, don't have to worry about this because they don't have a large store of language-related knowledge and habits built up already. They just grab their first language and run with it, so to speak. Some of this is, of course, a simplification. Young people tend to pick up on new things faster than older people for a variety of reasons, not least of which is that they have more plastic brains that are, at a biological level, simply better at processing information. But that doesn't change the fact that an important obstacle for learning for adults is that their large database of knowledge and habits gets in the way of forward progress. Older people are rigid for rational reasons. What they know has given them the tools to survive, although not necessarily thrive, in their day-to-day lives for an extended period of time. Since younger people don't have the catalog of experiences their elders do, they have more of what could be considered learning space. They're in a much more experimental mindset because they don't know what works and what doesn't, unlike an adult who may lean on suboptimal routines and ideas, if only because they work to some degree. This is at the core of the forever war between generations. Young people try out new things, some of which are good, some of which are bad, and older people who want to hang on to what's allowed them to thrive in their own time say they're misguided. Both sides are right to some degree, but the older crowd seems to dig in their heels and fight to the death every time. Why is there such a dire hatred of new ideas and ways of doing things? The answer is simple. Learning is easy, but unlearning is the definition of difficult. We can absorb new information at any time, no matter what age we are. It's when we realize we need to rearrange our worldview that we run into serious problems. Unlearning requires that you sit down and have an honest conversation with yourself about how valid your current beliefs are. You might find yourself confronted with evidence that knowledge you hold dear to your heart is outdated, less accurate than you thought, or outright wrong. Maybe it was correct to hang on to it in a past era, and the world has changed without your permission. Or perhaps it was wrong from the get-go, but it wasn't wrong enough to be a problem until now. Either way, the people who don't make a point to go through the unlearning process are the ones who don't progress, period. No matter how good you are today, no matter how much knowledge and experience you've accumulated, if you aren't in the habit of putting it all under the microscope, you will be surpassed. That isn't speculation, it's a guarantee. Part of what makes this all so difficult is the fact that over time, we come to identify with all this incorrect information. We build up an image of ourselves and hold on to that for dear life. You tell yourself stories about how you're the person who does that one thing. It becomes part of your style, your way of standing out. And if the linchpin of your personality ends up as a liability, you're more likely to ignore it and look to other factors to blame when you don't succeed. There's a concept in cognitive science called processing fluency, which describes the level of difficulty we associate with certain types of information. Anything we come across that is easy to think about has high processing fluency, and we all have a bad habit of viewing it as positive. Whenever we find information hard to think about, we tend to classify it as negative and avoid it. In a nutshell, processing fluency tells us that we see anything that's hard to think about as bad and anything that feels nice to think about as good. If you've ever wondered why you find it so easy to watch videos on YouTube instead of work on something that you know is more important but difficult, processing fluency is to blame. Learning something that we want to learn about, that fits our worldview, or otherwise panders to our current understanding, tends to have a high level of processing fluency. And anything that puts that same understanding under a more critical microscope has a low level of processing fluency. Since it feels bad and the target of the activity is us, we tend to view it as an attack on our inner selves and respond defensively. Older people in particular are guilty of this. They often dedicate years or even decades of their lives to certain ideas, and they don't see a way to turn themselves around in public without feeling like they've wasted much of their lives. It feels like an attack on a sacred institution they've built up, rather than an examination of something much less personal. This is the sunk cost fallacy, of course, and there's always opportunity for change no matter how old you are. It's no exaggeration to say that unlearning is the single biggest bottleneck for almost every player out there who is struggling to move forward. It's not that you don't know enough, it's that your current knowledge is wrong in some fundamental way and you need to let go of it to make way for something better. No matter what you learn on top of what you know, it will be built on a foundation of sand. What you don't need to do is layer on new information or skills, which will only make things worse for you. If you feel an urge to do this when you run into obstacles, then that by itself is a significant leak that you need to address. It's a clear sign that you fear the unknown and the uncomfortable, and neither is acceptable if you want to be a great player. A player who refuses to unlearn those bad habits which cost them matches is like a person who keeps trying to fill up a bucket with a massive hole in it. Every time you try to fill it up, water spills out of the hole, yet you remain confused and repeat that mistake over and over again. It's as if you'd rather blame the water instead of taking the steps to remedy this obvious problem. You need to care about this if you're a competitor, as you have to perform under intense amounts of pressure. It's in these moments that your worst leaks will show themselves and scuttle your ability to win. If you didn't take the time to unlearn your bad habits, they will cost you when it matters the most. It also has the potential to create a feedback loop of tilt in the middle of a match. Your incorrect beliefs feed into failures, failures generate tilt, your decisions get worse, and then you start all over again with even more failures. Fingers get pointed outward, and the cycle gets more vicious by the moment. Some players get so sucked into this dynamic that they spend all their time and energy avoiding the truth. They only practice against players who are weaker than them, and they will fight to the death with anyone who highlights their leaks. As much as these players want to improve, their single greatest obstacle is their own mentality towards unlearning. Coaches are a prominent part of all competitive activities, and contrary to public perception, it's not because they're so good at showing their players new ideas. That may be part of the process, but the greatest value any coach can bring to the table is the ability to diagnose and fix bad habits and beliefs. It's possible to go through that process on your own, but it's far more effective to have an outside influence who can look at what you do and take notes without risking their own identity in the process. A poor coach does not identify or work on your leaks, and the results often speak for themselves. One famous example is the now retired UFC fighter Ronda Rousey, whose single biggest weakness was her striking. She had a world-class grappling background and used it to great effect in most of her fights, but her boxing left much to be desired. Her coaches did not address that weakness, despite all the bright, flashing red lights, and her career was ended in violent fashion by fighters who knew how to exploit that leak. When a player leaves a team or a coach, the problem is often that they realize they're stuck in the same patterns and their growth depends on breaking out of them. Sometimes a person or group of people is just too familiar with you to notice what you're doing wrong, and sometimes they may see it but not have the tools to help you fix it. It's at that point many competitors will make the rational choice to make a change and find an environment where they can unlearn those critical bugs in their play. Esports represents perhaps the apex of this dynamic, since the games themselves are bound to change as the developers update them. A valid tactic or belief about the game may become obsolete overnight, and if you can't make a smart adjustment, you'll find yourself at a disadvantage so fast it'll make your head spin. Players and coaches need to be extra vigilant about unlearning so their prior knowledge doesn't handicap them when the game is modified by the developer. In short, if you're an esports competitor, you need to prioritize debugging your leaks and unlearning them above almost everything else. Chances are that falling behind on that even a little bit will cost you more than you realize, especially in the long run. What are some things you need to unlearn in order to move forward in esports or anything else in your life? Leave a comment with your story. Maybe you can be the spark that leads someone else to realize they too have a critical leak that needs to be addressed. And if you want some direct help from me with unlearning your bad habits, join the Cult of Theta Discord and then navigate to the Review My Footage channel, where cult members have already started submitting videos of themselves playing Onward and a few other games. I'll use that footage to make at least one review video, so it's also a chance to get your play highlighted on my channel. Just make sure you accept the donut when you join the cult. That's all I've got for today. Until next time, this is Theta, signing off.
Told you not to come to China.
I hate you so much right now, Thick.